Hello and welcome to a new episode of our weekly show, Global Insight. I'm your host, Hasan Youness. According to many analysts, the US administration policy in the Middle East is being characterized by confusion, ambiguity, and lack of decisiveness. This can be exemplified by the prolongation of the Syrian conflict and the delay in Geneva II. The ambiguity can be apparent via the resignation of Qatar's emir and the many talks about a US intervention behind this decision. This also applies to the Turkish protests and the hidden messages sent by the US to Erdogan, who is the US #1 ally in the Middle East after Israel. This is accompanied by the confusion in Egypt, especially regarding the description of Morsi's ouster as being a coup or not, and its implication. These topics will gain deep insights with Dr. Kayrouz, a political analyst and university professor. Hello, Dr. Al.
Hello, how are
And
you?
we will be joined in this episode through a phone intervention with Ms. Hayat Hariri, who is a journalist as well. Before gaining deep insights about the ambiguity and the confusion in the US policy in the Middle East, we will start with a report and then continue our discussion.
The Obama administration is losing control on its Middle East policy, jeopardizing Washington's credibility. The U.S. administration policy in the Middle East is characterized, according to many commentators, by confusion and ambiguity. The confusion was apparent in Qatar Emir's resignation, especially with the skepticism regarding the underlying reasons. There were leaks that stated that the White House imposed this succession plan on Qatar's Emir without any room for discussion. The underlying reasons are attributed to the deviation in Hamad's expenditure on Islamist groups and the Syrian conflict, in addition to many actions undertaken by Qatar's Emir, which did not meet the U.S. interests. This action was surprising due to the strong ties between the U.S. and Qatar's Emir. These ties are also established between the U.S. and Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan. In the Turkish scenario, Turkish and foreign politicians agree that the US and UK are interfering in the current Turkish unrest and are trying to send a so-called diplomatic message to Erdogan. This might be attributed to the conservative initiatives taken by Erdogan, which contradict with the role he should assume as chairman of the Justice and Development Party known as AKP. Such intervention is parallel to sectarian rhetoric that is considered alien to the Turks, especially in the confused Middle Eastern region. The White House has carefully avoided criticizing the Prime Minister directly, though the U.S. has urged Turkish authorities to exercise restraint on the excessive use of force against protesters. This is leading to lack of clarity of who is considered a close U.S. ally and who is not. The lack of assertiveness and decisiveness in the U.S. policy is apparent in the Syrian conflict, especially in the preparing for Geneva II, the extent to which the U.S. is willing to militarily support the opposition, and the possible intended prolongation of the conflict. However, the confused and failing Syria policy is only the half of the story. The other half is in dealing with the Iranian policy described by a group of former senior U.S. officials as a two-pronged strategy of sanctions and diplomacy, which produced unintended consequences without achieving strategic objectives. This is accompanied with the emerging confusion which the U.S. will face with the Egyptian military's overthrow of elected President Mohamed Morsi. Hence, if the U.S. considers Morsi's ouster a coup, the U.S. law mandates that most aid for its long-time ally must stop. This might weaken the Egyptian military, which has long-standing ties with the U.S. authorities and which receives $1.5 billion in aid per year, and might put the U.S. in a dilemma again.
Somebody brought you.
Hello again, Dr. Kayrouz. In fact, this report has revealed to a certain extent, and according to some analysts, the confused and the ambiguous U.S. policy regarding the Middle East. Do you agree with this ambiguity and confusion, or do you have another perspective?
Let me put it from this different angle. A policy is an action taken by a power or somebody. The action is, it has two sides to it, two parts. One, that what the maker of the policy is intending, what objective they want to achieve. And the second one is the receiver of the policy, how do they see that? Yani, it's a matter of sort of communication, probably.
Between the sender of the message and the recipient.
And receiver. Now, with the Americans, believe me, they have everything planned. American foreign policy is not designed and produced overnight. Is not a reaction to a crisis. Most of the time,
it's a strategic plan, a long-term
exactly,
plan.
it's a long-term plan. They have planned for it. They know. They have put certain strategies whereby they say you might have option 1, option 2, option 3.
But as you know, there is always deviation from what we plan. So you have to control to a certain extent.
That's why they go for plan 1, 2, 3, etc. They have, and they are usually prepared to deal with it if it deviates from what normally would one
from
one
the right
would
track
expect.
which they intend to
exactly.
To follow.
So the Americans, but in the Americans, and the foreign policy is not made by one individual.
Definitely.
It's not made by a small group. There are large groups. So if we were to take it really and try to explain it, you have the intelligence that has a big role in the foreign policy. You have the military industrial complex that has a big role, plays a big role. You have the State Department and all the others. You have Congress that plays a major role. You have the people, the American citizens,
the public,
who really
the public opinion,
exactly.
which has to be taken into consideration whenever we want to formulate any policy.
Then you have the allies.
But talking about the American people, let's start from here. Are the foreign policies which are being formulated by the U.S. of concern to the American people, or they are more concerned about their social lives, their economic problems, rather than the foreign agenda?
The public usually cares about how much is going to cost them out of their pocket and how it's going to affect their economic life. Besides that,
is the U.S. administration responding to these concerns in its policies?
Not always.
Not always.
Because what the administration sees is not what the
It might be contradictory.
No, because the administration might see something in the next maybe 20 years from now, something in the long run, while the public wants it today, wants it tomorrow. And so that's why sometimes you might have that conflict. And that's why we can see that in the elections, that sometimes they choose somebody different, when in reality, the newcomer has not made many changes. The changes are very minimal. It's a sort of a little maquillage, you know, something that you produce to make things a little bit different. But in reality, the essence of the foreign policy and the principle, the basis, pillars, are going to be stable. So therefore, I don't think there is an ambiguity to us who are viewing it, but not to the Americans themselves. Let's also take another issue. The Americans came to be world leaders without experience. When the Americans now in the Middle East, they have had many experiences that they were not that great. And they were really, as a matter of fact, very damaging to America, to the leadership, to the public, and to the American budget, the American money. Let's put it this way. For example, in Afghanistan, they failed. In Iraq, it was a failure, whether we like it or not.
So they are witnessing great deviations from what they are planning, and you're saying whenever there is a deviation, there is a plan B or another option, another alternative. But the other alternative is not being exercised, and the evidence for this is that they are witnessing many failures in many regions.
No, those failures, for us, they are failures. For them, those who are making, the policy makers, there could be that these are part of a bigger plan.
Okay, let's start analyzing certain incidents in the Middle Eastern region, starting with Syria. Is it complying to the interest of the U.S. what's happening nowadays in Syria, the prolongation of the conflict in Syria?
I think the Americans were not very upset about having the Russians move in. They wanted the Russians to feel and to taste, because in the Middle East, we have different culture. We have different understanding of politics. We have so many problems now. We are evolving as a society, as groups, as people. And so therefore, this evolution is very bloody. It takes a lot of violence yet. It takes time. So therefore, the Americans say, why should we as Americans pay the price Why should we be the ones to go inside and have another failure? Let somebody else do it. And so therefore, for the American, that's not ambiguous.
But in this case, you're saying that they are not being upset of the Russians' intervention. The Russians' intervention, the Russian support, whether militarily, whether diplomatically, is leading to some victories on the battleground, on the battlefield. And this is giving more bargaining power to the Russians. So how can this be up to the Americans' interests?
There's always, behind the scene, there's always negotiations.
Yeah,
talks.
definitely.
They know exactly what's going on. And they tell the Russians, you go that far, then after that it stops. Because remember, there are more actors than the Americans. Israel is an actor.
Definitely.
The Arab world, the Gulf countries are actors.
You
have Iran is an actor.
Here there might be another argument regarding the Gulf countries. The Gulf countries might be perceived by many commentators as being passive recipients. Talking about the sender of a message and the recipient, they are being passive, so they don't contribute to the formulation of the U.S. policy. They only receive it.
Not directly, but indirectly they support it, and that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
Financially or
through the petrodollars.
Yes, exactly. So when we are talking about here, that we see that the Americans now in Syria, they didn't want to go inside because really for them it was a lost cause. If we were to be in their place, we would not interfere. We would not get in. America doesn't need. This is what we have to understand also from their point of view, to go into a country and always pacify, act as the police force internationally to try to pacify the world. They don't need that. So the American can tell you, there are a group now in the US, they are calling for isolation, go back to isolation to a certain degree, to a certain level, saying, look, we tell the people of the world, you stay away, we'll stay away. You want to attack us, we'll destroy you. That's it, it's simple. We have the weapons, we have whatever it takes. So, but this is not the case. Today we are in a world of globalization.
Yeah.
Today we are so much interdependent.
And
today we need a market for all our products. The Americans today, we cannot say stay silent about something that goes on in another country. And the Americans are people like all the others.
Yeah.
And you have all kind of groups and you have all kind of lobbies, the pressure groups that really do use their power.
Who try to exercise their bargaining power.
And then in America, like in any other place, you have people, you have leaders, politicians who try to use a certain crisis to develop for themselves a certain power or a certain recognition. So basically, really, we are like all human beings everywhere, what's happening all over the world. And so the Americans here, when they formulate their foreign policy or decide to go in, specifically that America now is hit badly economically. Nobody wants the Americans to go into Syria, give any money, support anybody. They say, as long as the Syrians know how to kill each other, let them kill each other.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
This is another...
Straightforwardly, is what happening in Syria up to the American interests?
At this moment, it does not hurt the American interest as long as they have they have Turkey on one side, okay, and they have the Gulf countries on the others. They know that in Syria it's a stalemate. As long as they can provide some weapons to the opposition. And those weapons are coming from different sources. They don't have to come from America.
Yeah.
And so therefore the
American allies.
The Americans are saying, let's wait, watch, and see.
But while watching and waiting and seeing, the Russians are gaining more bargaining power. And this bargaining power is being exercised on the negotiation table. And we've witnessed the Russians' bargaining power in the G8.
Sometimes you have to give in certain areas to take something in another area.
But what are they getting from the Russians? The Russians are not willing to make any compromise.
Oh, they are.
What compromise?
What compromise? On a different thing. There are economic compromises, there are compromises in Afghanistan, there are compromises perhaps in other countries, there are compromises in different places that we are not fully aware of. But behind the scene, there's all kind of activities going on. It's a continuous process. Give and take. I give you here. Besides, in Syria, Russia has more access more, because of the Orthodox group, you know, the Christian over there, and because also they have good relation with the Syrian government.
Yeah, it's a historical relation.
And in addition to this, because the opposition, in the opposition, a new group came about that really became fundamentalist to a point, and really aggressive, and they put some, they show some few events that really brought the American public. We have to think here.
Yeah.
This is where the American public began to
be
also aware, and the European more than the Americans. Because here again, when we talk about American foreign policy, we have to really pay attention to its allies.
To the European stance as well.
Absolutely, because they have to coordinate. When the Americans do not coordinate, then the Europeans are very upset. Like now, for example, there are some differences between the two. But the Europeans always depend on the Americans to resolve world problems.
Further insights about the American perception of the Syrian conflict, among many other conflicts in the Middle East, will be right after the break.
The crisis of capitalism, the European impasse, the energy shortages, the emerging power of Asia, the economic power of the Arab world, the economic debate, informative, revealing, and progressive. It discusses the economic event of the world.
Economic debate, where the numbers reveal the truth.
Hello again to Global Insight. In fact, we will be joined, Dr. Kayrouz, with a phone call from Ms. Hayat Hariri, who is a journalist and a political analyst. She will be joining us from Beirut. Hello, Ms. Hayat. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, hello, Mr. Hassan.
Hello. In fact, before the break, we were talking about the prolongation of the Syrian conflict. Some commentators might say that it's due to certain confusion and ambiguity in the U.S. policy. However, Dr. Kayrouz said that it's pre-planned, and it is of the U.S. interest to have this prolongation. What's your stance regarding that?
Okay. First, before talking about the U.S. policies in Syria, we should briefly explain the goal behind these policies in Syria as well in the region in general. We all know it's not a secret that the primary interest or concern for the U.S. is the security of Israel. So based on this fact, I believe that the whole U.S. policies in the region are based on the idea that we as American, or they should weaken the unity of the Arab region, which will lead eventually to the disintegration of the Arab states, and in order to transform it for a place for internal ethnic, religious conflict with weak economy. And the reason behind this, in my opinion, is to eliminate or to kill the feeling of belonging of the Arab national towards the Arab national identity, and to eliminate any possible anti-Israeli project against Israel. So based on this idea, we can explain the U.S. policies in Syria, or the U.S. stand in Syria. I believe that first, the U.S. state or the U.S. policies were aiming at toppling the Syrian president. However, with time, in the last few months, when they saw how the flow of the fundamental extremist Islam and the fear from this extremist, and at the same time, Syria as a state showed a great resistance against this war, and it is reflected in the unity of the army. I guess the U.S. policies altered. So instead of toppling the Syrian president, the Syrian regime, they changed it, or they altered a bit towards weakening the Syrian state, weakening the idea of the Syrian state, which aims at eliminating the leading role of Syria as one of the primary players in the politics of the Middle East, and as a big supporter to the remaining resistance movements in the region against Israel. So now, I guess, yes, the U.S. might be interested or might benefit from prolonging this conflict, this war, trying to have certain benefits, to gain certain benefits, to change the balance of power.
Might Miss Hayat, might achieving some victories on the ground in the battlefield be one of the underlying reasons for the prolongation of the Syrian conflict?
Yes, of course. I think that we might go for the U.S. might postpone Geneva too, because, you know, when you are playing politics, you don't care about the people, the principles, democracy, and so on. So they are trying, I guess, they are trying now to change a bit from the new balance of power in the Syrian war, and that's why they don't mind to prolong this conflict. Maybe they want to get rid of the Islamists on one hand, and on the in the second place, they also want to have some victories between quotations.
Ms. Hayat, out of Dr. Kayrouz's facial expression, I think that he has something to add to what you've said, or to contradict or agree. I don't know. Do you have anything to say?
No, I would like first to greet her for what she said. But I would like to clarify a few points.
Stay with us, please, Ms. Hayat, okay?
In reality, what she mentioned about Israel being another actor, a very effective actor, and also whispering to the Americans what would be their best policy in that area, I think that is true. We cannot deny that. But the fact that the Americans, as we sometimes say, that they are at the mercy of Israel, I think that's very debatable. I know from the Center for Strategic International Studies, whether it is the Brookings Institute or others who formulate American foreign policy and they do research for them, that really the Jewish lobby, or what we give, it has certain influence, but it's not
to the extent
influence that we give it.
This
okay?
is
but it has
debatable.
influence.
Yeah, it's your viewpoint. It's debatable.
Another thing is that the prolongation of the conflict definitely it creates a certain. They want to see, yet they have not known. They are not known, or it's not known how the conflict is going to go. Who is going to win? The Americans don't want the government to win. They don't want at the same time the opposition to win. They want to see a sort of a new formula in Syria that could bring together
both,
perhaps a better, more developed, stable Syria, maybe people with evolution as far as going away from fundamentalism or other type of things,
but the prolongation of the conflict is leading to more and more fundamentalism and radicalism.
Temporarily, you are agree.
But they are rooted there. They are
before the storm.
The land has become very fertile for fundamentalism there, in addition to many other regions.
Sooner or later, evolution is going to happen. Fundamentalism on one side is going to create another fundamentalist on another side. There's always going to be counterpart, a pole, another pole. And so basically what's going to happen is that if that continues, then until the fighting is saturated, both are completely, they have no more to fight with, then in this case, they bring them to a table and they try to find a solution. And nobody worries about whether the Russians are going to have an upper hand or lower hand. See, there's always a possibility within a very short time
for certain compromise,
changing,
maybe, or
exactly
change.
For changing the entire direction of peace or something else. So nobody is worrying about the Russians are going to be forever in Syria, or they're going to win and the Americans are going to lose. Here it's a continuous conflict. It's a race between two superpowers that they are trying diplomatically.
It's an optimistic perspective. It's not wrong. You have an optimistic perspective. Just, Ms. Hayat, are you still with me?
Yes.
Yeah, just to end this call, out of the major incidents which are taking place maybe in Egypt, in Qatar, in Turkey, do you think that this reflects a confusion in the U.S. policy, or it's pre-planned?
Well, we cannot deny that there is a plan, as I mentioned. There is a plan, in my opinion, that started in 2003 to recreate the new Middle East that we always talk about. It started with Iraq in 2003, later on with Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, until Syria. However, at the same time, the Americans, at some places, yes, they are confused because, as I mentioned, in some places the plan, the results of the plan was not as they wish or as they thought it will be. So they may alter a bit from their policies. However, again, I put it in the context that I mentioned before. And just to go back, before continuing, just to go back to Syria, I think what the Americans are looking for in Syria is an ally state to Israel. This is the new Syria that they want to create, and that's why they are against the regime, or they prefer, since the regime, as I mentioned, showed great resistance to this war. I guess today they prefer to weaken this regime, and it's not related to the development of the Arabic people or the prosperity and these principles or slogans of democracy.
Ms. Hayat, Hariri, a journalist and a political analyst who joined us from Beirut, I highly thank you for your insights. Dr. Kayrouz, do you anticipate having Geneva 2 any soon?
No, not really. Even as a matter of fact, I might feel that it might not happen. And if it does happen, it's going to be only a matter of social gathering, and that's it.
The prerequisites for this conference aren't there yet.
No, aren't there. And even if they were there, I don't think they are serious about it.
Moving from Syria to another region, to Turkey, which is witnessing protests, unprecedented actually. And many analysts say that these protests are messages being sent from the US to Erdogan because he has deviated from the track which was drawn to him. So what's your stance?
That could be. Because basically, when the Americans are dealing with a leader like Erdogan, they are really, I don't want to say dictating, but they are advising, guiding, and we have to go through that, recommending. We have to go through that process. Now, once he starts becoming, on his own, that's the same thing happened with the Shah of Iran a long time ago, and some other leaders. Whenever they try to deviate and to give themselves a lot of influence.
What happened with the Shah of Iran might be debatable as well.
Yeah, that's right. But you see, their friends. We talk about friends being their friend, being their ally.
Yeah, and by the way, Erdogan is considered a very close friend to Obama himself.
That could be that we, in our own point of view, from our own eyes, but in politics, in government, there are no friendship.
Sure.
There's only a matter of interests. You fit in that box, then we are great, big friends.
Erdogan used to fit, and he no more fits.
He changed, and Erdogan is really pushing. He's bringing. He drew, as a matter of fact, Turkey from Europe into the Arab world, the Arab Islamic world, and so that really came about. That the Americans were began to fear that this country that we have been supporting so much to stand up on the borders of Russia,
in the region.
That's basically, it now has new design that they want to rule the region. They want to be, Erdogan probably has begun to plan, directly or indirectly, that Turkey should be the power in the region.
And they are not allowed to have this powerful position in the region.
No one is allowed.
No one is allowed.
No one is allowed. Because once you get that, then it becomes you cannot control that region anymore. If the region is united,
region will not be controlled by the US.
By anybody.
By anybody.
Because, if we can create the United States of the Arab world, who can stand up to us? Who's going to stand up? So this is why they don't want that to happen. It's a matter of interest.
So
it's a strategic interest, military interest, economic interest, marketing interest, whatever you want to talk about.
So according to the US perspective, as I've understood from what you've said, you can stay as an ally, a strong ally, as long as you are weak.
as long as you comply with, they will support you all the way, as long as you are within the same guidelines that they have set up for both of them.
So,
they don't want to see somebody.
Erdogan is taking Turkey, according to the US perspective, into more extremism?
Exactly. I mean, when he starts saying that, for example, stewardesses should not put any red. So they were afraid that he's going back to fundamentalism, and he's leading the country into
the models which are there already.
Which they are fighting, and they don't want that to happen. We want this country, this area to evolve into democracy, evolve into
and
respecting human rights, moderation, accepting others, openness to others, tolerance, coexistence. We don't want to have people who are really fanatic and they are trying to create more destruction.
Do you think part of the messages which are being sent to Erdogan are due to his failure in unifying the Syrian oppositions?
That could be. That could be, and I would say that not only he failed, but he did not really manage properly the relation with the Syrian. He was supposed, perhaps, and I cannot really vouch for that, you know, officially, but I would say he was supposed to perform certain job in reference to the Syrian opposition. He did not. He was too hesitant and too...
He was too hesitant, and he is accused of supporting the extremist groups in...
Exactly. Even though the Europeans supported him,
and the
NATO
front,
stood up, you know, they would say, and Germany came about, etc. He did not take the... I think Erdogan came to a point feeling that he is a unique person, and this is probably where personality comes into a certain role, playing certain role, that I understand, I know who I am, and this is the weakness of many of our Arab leaders. When they start feeling on themselves that they are invincible, that they cannot be given any advice, and they are the ones who knows everything.
We will continue with Turkey in addition to Egypt and Iran right after the break.
Beyond the lines, beyond the surface. Depth, clarity, substance. Beyond the discourse.
Beyond politics, beyond the shallowness of everyday politics.
Back to our insights. In fact, many analysts are talking or are raising the issue of the radicalization which is taking place in the region, as you've said, and this is one of the underlying reasons which are behind the messages being sent to Erdogan and maybe to Qatar's emir as well. Is the US and Europe, are the US and Europe together worried about the radicalization, especially that the Europeans, once they sent some Europeans to help the Syrian opposition, they've got back to Europe radicalized. Is it a concern?
Yes, it is. It is a big concern. And there's a lot of fear coming about. There is no doubt about it that this, let's say the struggle or the conflict between cultures, that brings in all of this, and that could be possibility of the cause of future World War III possible. So the Americans and the Europeans, they want to take a proactive action, trying to prevent things from happening. That's why they say we support a group, they turn out to be worse than the group that was before. So therefore, let's cool it off. Let them destroy each other until we find out exactly what's going to happen and we go on a really with some steps that they are very safe, very secure. And this is how they are not going to get in. They are not going to get involved. They can talk about it. They can promise. They can come around you. But they cannot, they will not interfere militarily. They will not interfere like in the past. In the past, if Bush was still president, Bush perhaps he would have been, because he thinks of himself or of America as being the police of the world. With Obama, when the people today,
they cannot tolerate even. They cannot afford.
They cannot go for it. They cannot afford it. Economically, they cannot afford it. They are 17 trillion, you know, in the red, the economy. They are, so they cannot afford it. The people are upset. The people, they say, well, listen, who cares about what's happening abroad? I want to see what will happen to America. Then America is now exposed to too many possibilities, a lot of fear going in the US about possible, what we call natural disasters. Many scientists are predicting, and that's really causing a lot of fear in the American heart. That's why also many Americans are taking their money outside. That's why we got the FATCA, we got those new laws and regulations to go around.
Of capital.
That's right.
Yeah,
so
it's a fact.
This is why. So you see, the Americans
have different concerns nowadays.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
We've witnessed what has taken place in Egypt, the ouster of Morsi, the former president of Egypt. According to your perspective and your definition as a political science professor, can you define what has happened in Egypt as a coup or not?
No, I personally would say that it is not a coup. A coup usually is when you have the military takes all the action and really gets into and take over the power. Without having any popular support, the popular support comes later. The military here was only a consequence, a result of the movement, the popular movement. Egypt has been for 1 year almost. But
the movement of the people, of the 33 millions, if it wasn't accompanied by this military intervention, it might have stayed for years. If it wasn't, according to some analysts, I'm saying.
Remember.
So the military intervention has determined what has taken place.
These same 30 million were not pro-military before.
Okay.
They were worried about it. Now that they found out that they have no other choice, that the man was becoming a dictator, changing laws, doing whatever he wants, and a group of people bringing back Egypt
But according to huge majority of the Egyptians, Hosni Mubarak before was becoming a dictator, and the military didn't intervene.
And that's why he should have been changed. Why do you think Baradi, where was Baradi really trained? And who really was pushing Baradi and some of the others, these revolutionary, to come around and to use the people today and to try to do what the people wants? And they came into the name of the people. The coup that took place with Abdel Nasser, the coup that took place with maybe Idi Amin and somewhere or some other countries, there were different coups. There was a military coming overnight, instantly, nobody knows about it.
But according to many analysts, it has taken place overnight, and the military overnight have got rid of.
No, there was a thing that were really growing about, and the opposition or whatever now, they were calling upon the military to come in and take over and support them. And also the military gave a warning several times, and they gave Morsi the chance, and they asked for certain things. So really, in reality, it was not.
But they've assumed that he wasn't going to be responsive, definitely. No president can be responsive, especially that he has arrived to govern, to preside Egypt based on elections, which were characterized by integrity at that time.
The coup d'etat has several definitions. Usually, a coup d'etat is done with bloody things, that you go to the opposition, you destroy it, and you take over the government, and nobody stands in your face.
Okay.
This has not been done. They didn't oppose the opposition. Yesterday were another so many millions demonstrating.
Yeah, but there was bloodshed as well yesterday.
There were very few, but this was normal in skirmishes, and those are, we don't count them. But there was no military coming in with tanks or destroying cities, destroying country, destroying the people, etc. No. By definition,
So this deprives,
is not a
so
coup.
this what you've mentioned deprives what has
legally-
happened in Egypt from being described or named a coup d'etat. Okay.
International, according to international law, I am talking here because I really have some knowledge of that. This is not a coup d'etat.
So-
People can say whatever they want to say. But I mean,
your
this is-
perspective
this
is highly aligned to the hesitancy in naming what has happened in Egypt a coup d'etat by Obama in his speeches. He has never named it so far a coup d'etat.
No, and not even Europeans, not anybody yet. Otherwise, they would have done it. Yet no one has named it a coup d'etat except those who really just want it to happen. It's not a coup d'etat. A coup d'etat would have changed the entire thing.
But the entire thing has changed.
No. Still today, Egypt now is going into a very difficult situation. I hope they will not have a civil war. I will hope that it will not be. A coup d'etat would not have allowed a civil war. A coup d'etat means a military takeover of everything. Takeover of the parliament, takeover of the forces.
But maybe the consequence of what has happened, okay.
Everything, education, take over of everything. And usually with the military coup d'etat, there is always what we call a security whereby people are not allowed to go into the streets for a certain time. You have an imposition of
a ban of any movement, maybe on the
exactly.
On the
So you have to, for example, from such hour to such hour, you're not allowed.
Okay,
so this was not really, it was not done.
Do you think that the Americans are avoiding naming what has happened in Egypt a coup d'etat to continue on supporting the Egyptian army? You know that the Egyptian army is supported by $1.5 billion a year by the Americans. And they perceive the Egyptian army as the stabilizer in the region.
No.
And the American law bans any support for any army if a coup d'etat has taken place.
That's true. This is a very good point to bring it forth. But
Okay.
I'll tell you, Obama is not, because if Obama were to declare that this is a coup d'etat, I think Obama would be a laughable person. And everybody will oppose him. And what are you talking about?
The law doesn't
So,
allow him to continue his support. The law, the
yeah,
American
this
law.
doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother us. What bothers us, you misjudge. A coup d'etat of what? It's not a coup d'etat. Because this is why Obama could not ridicule himself by saying it is a coup d'etat. So Obama has to say that this is, silence is better. Wait and see. Let's see the development. And eventually, the Europeans also did not mention that. The Russians did not mention that. Nobody has come up because it is not. Because according to what law, international law teaches and all of this is not a coup d'etat. So therefore, they are waiting to see. And this is true also the fact that this would have, the Congress would have taken an action immediately to stop the aid. But I don't think, even if the Congress would stop the aid, there's all kinds of ways and means to get aid. I mean, it could be through a third channel, or fourth channel.
Yeah, they rely on this aid, actually.
Let's not be victimized or being sometimes imprisoned by few little laws or few little sentences, because it has a lot of things to do. Israel is one of the first things that Congress is violating. The Israelis have nuclear technology, and that's against the law. But the Americans are not saying that they have it. Although the Israelis have admitted it.
Everything that applies to Israel is two-sided in the American eyes.
I wouldn't worry about this. I think the Americans are looking for, specifically that now you have Baradi and you have the leadership of the opposition or the revolutionary type. You have the military, you have Baradi, you have the patriarch or whoever, Shnuda, etc.
Is there a correlation between the resignation of Qatar's emir, the protests in Turkey, and what has happened? Let's say with the ouster of Morsi.
The way I read it, is that Qatar is a big base for the Americans, military base. At the same time, it's a big area that the Americans have good relation with. The Qatari emir, to a certain degree, certain time,
deviated.
he was supporting, exactly. he deviated. He was supporting the fundamentalist groups.
Yeah. And he wanted to be the orchestrator of the region,
therefore,
and he's not allowed.
He was kindly asked, resign, let your son take over, and you will be respected,
sure.
and we support him, and Qatar will be in great shape. So I think this is what the whole thing is a happy medium, at the end...
So supporting the extremist groups is one of the underlying reasons for the resignation for the imposition on Qatar's Emir to give the title of Emir to his
Actually,
son.
After the Libyan revolution and the other revolutions that took place, the Europeans and the Americans, they are watching very carefully if there is any place, any country, any area where you have fundamentalism. They are really taking the other side and trying to create, but they don't want themselves to fight it. They want the people of the region or of the area to fight it themselves. So they create a group. Believe me, in few weeks perhaps, maybe few months, you're going to have a group coming out in Turkey, born another pole that's going to stand up to whatever is extremism. So they are going to create this to see at the end how this evolutionary possibility for tolerance, for acceptance, for international, perhaps global brotherhood, etc., could be achieved or not. Because that will benefit everybody in the world.
Yeah.
Wars would not benefit anybody. And conflict would not benefit anybody.
The election of a new Iranian president, do you think that it will contribute to altering the U.S. policy or the U.S. stance or perception of Iran?
We all hope for that, but I have my doubts. Between Iran and the U.S. and Israel on one side. Some Arab countries, it's not that strong, is the issue of nuclear technology.
Definitely.
So the new president is now going to change because he is not the one who makes the decision. The decision is going to be made by Murshid al-Ala. Okay? So basically, I don't think that Iran is going to give up its whatever it has already gained internationally. Like North Korea, up to this moment, they didn't give up anything.
Definitely.
And they are continuing. So I think that that's not.
So regardless of the name of the president, the policy of Iran will continue to be the same, and the gap between.
But it might be soft.
Yeah, this is what I.
Yeah,
so do you anticipate that it will be softer as you're calling it?
It might be softer, more open, a little bit here and there. So instead of having it always, tight and and whatsoever rigid, then you have more flexibility. But the flexibility under real diplomatic things. Instead of telling the person, I hate you, I say, I love you, but you stay where you are and I stay where I am.
So the U.S. and Iran will go to the negotiation table?
They will have to continue the negotiations. And the negotiations are meaningless unless...
There are certain intentions to...
Unless something is given. You see, a negotiation without a win-win situation has no value.
So there has to be some intentions
the Iranians have to
change.
Win something, and in the same
so
time they can give something to the Americans, Europeans. But the Europeans and the Americans, to go back to your point of view, they are worried very much about the future conflicts. That's really coming from the Middle East.
Dr. Kayrouz, a political analyst and university professor, I highly thank you for your deep insights, and I highly thank Ms. Hayat Hariri, who joined us via phone. In fact, the extent to which the American policy in the Middle East is confused or lack clarity or not is debatable, as we've witnessed in this episode. However, the region of the Middle Eastern region is characterized by such uncertainty. To what extent will this uncertainty continue? We'll discover in future episodes. Until then, stay tuned to Global Insight.